Many good people think Citizens United is the worst decision the Supreme Court has made in recent memory. I'm here to suggest to you that it was a good decision, and more importantly, that it was good for the independent movement. What Citizens United held was that a corporation, in that case it was a nonprofit corporation, could spend its money to broadcast a TV documentary, video on demand, that referenced, and in fact was focused on, a political candidate for election 30 days before a primary election. That had been illegal. Those who decry and revile Citizens United rally around one simple applause line. They say, corporations are not people. People are people. You will find this in the proposed amendments to overturn it and in the applause lines given by many good people, well-intentioned people who don't like the decision. What they mean is corporations should not, do not, and cannot have the same First Amendment rights as flesh and blood individual human beings. So I'd like to invite you to join me in interrogating that proposition to see if it's true and if it's a good idea. Question 1, do these corporations have First Amendment rights? They are all for-profit corporations, and no one has ever suggested they have anything other than full First Amendment rights. When the Supreme Court decided the Pentagon Papers case, both the New York Times and the Washington Post were for-profit, publicly traded corporations, and it was a First Amendment case. A lot of complicated issues about national security, but no one suggested they should lose the case because they're corporations. Of course they have First Amendment rights. The question then is, do they have greater First Amendment rights than other corporations? And the answer to that is no. There is no precedent, no court has ever said that there's an institution called the press that has special rights under the Constitution. People say, well, isn't there a press clause in the First Amendment? Yes, there is. The Constitution says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. But no one has ever suggested, no court has ever suggested, that that gives an institution that was intended to enshrine a special institution in our country called the press that had speech rights greater than everybody else. And it would be a very dangerous thing if they did. Who would decide who's the press? The Federal Election Commission? Somebody else in government deciding who has privileged speech rights? At the time, think of the Revolutionary period. Think of the pamphleteers. Freedom of the press meant freedom to express your views. If you had access to a printing press, if you had the money to rent one, you could print your views and distribute them. That was what freedom of the press was. Today, the concept of the press is any way of you publishing your views. TV, radio, or the internet. That's what freedom of the press is. And there is no precedent for it being a greater speech rights for some institutions than for others. This was central in Citizens United. Citizens United was a nonprofit corporation. If it makes you feel better, think of them as Centrists United. Centrists United, they were funded by they were not centrists, but they might as well have been for constitutional purposes. 797 individuals who gave between $200 and $2,500, small donors, generally speaking, to conglomerate their speech through this corporation, this nonprofit. It wanted to run a 90-minute documentary about Hillary Clinton before the 2008 primaries. It was paying for it out of its corporate money. 30 days before the election. Under the McCain-Feingold law, that was squarely illegal. However, the McCain-Feingold law exempted the media. It tried to enshrine an institution and said these companies and others like them, they could have any documentary they wanted. They could run opinion shows, as they do, as you know they do, denigrating or celebrating any political candidate they wanted to their heart's content, right up to the election. But if a nonprofit corporation of independent citizens decided to agglomerate their resources and put it into a corporation to pay to try to put in a different voice and add their voice to the mix, McCain-Feingold said that was not only illegal, it was a crime. Core political speech, a crime. I submit to you that was crazy, and the Supreme Court was right to strike it down. I also submit it was good for the independent movement. Why would independents want these corporations and the two major political parties to dominate the national conversation? Independents should want to pool their resources and speak and have the independent voice heard through, let's say, maybe it's Unite America Incorporated, maybe it's Centrist Incorporated, Independents Incorporated. Will magnify the voice of independents. Independents are the underdogs and the outsiders. They should want to be able to pool their money and have their voices heard. Question 2, do individuals have the right to do what I just said, pool their resources? This is another way of looking at the Citizens United decision. On the left, Mr. Monopoly Man, Mr. Very Rich Individual. It has always been perfectly legal, and everyone agrees constitutionally protected for Mr. Rich Individual to spend as much money as he wants buying TV advertising in support or against any political candidate. Superimpose your least favorite billionaire. George Soros, David Koch, take your pick. Maybe you like them both, maybe you don't like them both. But a billionaire can buy an advertisement, let's say, spends $50 million to run an ad campaign within 30 days of an election, supporting candidate A. Let's say 1 million Americans, 1 million independent centrists, want to support a different candidate. They each give $50, pool it into a corporation to run a competing ad campaign. McCain-Feingold said, fine for Mr. Monopoly Man, criminal on the other side of the screen. I submit to you the Supreme Court was correct in saying that's not right. That's unconstitutional. And it was good for the independent movement that they did it. The independent movement should want to be able to combine its money and advocate for candidates. You heard it this morning, you heard it at lunchtime, it takes money to win elections. Independents need to pool their money and go and advocate for the candidates they support. Question 3, doesn't disclosure, full disclosure, address all of the real concerns that drive campaign finance? If you know who is spending money to support which candidates, the public, investigators, prosecutors, and journalists can investigate and stop quid pro quo corruption, can investigate and stop illegal foreign money, and can expose and potentially publicly shame politicians who are too obsequious to their donors and who are obviously selling themselves to their donors. Now, you may wonder, well, isn't there some problem of dark money? Didn't Citizens United give us dark money? Yes, there is dark money. No, it did not come from Citizens United. Dark money is the following. If a corporation only pays for issue advocacy to talk about an issue, guns, abortion, taxes, but doesn't mention the candidate, they can steer around the disclosure rules. Congress hasn't required those issue advocacy groups to disclose their donors. That's dark money. Congress should have addressed that and hasn't. On the other hand, there are constitutional issues there. First of all, Citizens United is not to blame for that. Citizens United addressed the disclosure issues for electioneering and upheld them 8-1. I hear all the time that Citizens United gave us dark money and struck down disclosure rules. Flatly wrong. It upheld the disclosure rules 8-1. Decades before Citizens United, the Supreme Court held that donors to groups like the NAACP, the Socialist Party of America, had a right to prevent their names from being disclosed in situations where they would be subject to harassment, and that would chill their First Amendment right to associate and support groups they believed in. That's a legitimate concern. However, there's a competing concern that we should know who's influencing our elections. Congress has steered away from addressing that problem. So the upshot is reform-minded independents, I would advocate, should focus on more and better disclosure, effective disclosure, addressing this disclosure problem on issue advocacy groups, but don't focus on banning pure political speech. Now, the examples I gave you have been nonprofit corporations expressing their views. And that is the principle, that was what was at issue in Citizens United, and that is the principal corporate voice, if you like, in our election system. People predicted that after Citizens United, the Fortune 500 would take over our electoral system. It hasn't happened. This graph is not fully showing here, but 5.9%, the green, is business corporate spending, for-profit corporation spending on PACs, super PACs. 65, the blue, 65.5%, individual donors, and the red is other issue are advocacy groups or groups funded principally by individual donors. So it just hasn't happened. And if you're really worried about for-profit companies, the Fortune 500, you could pass shareholder consent laws, federally or in every state. Make the shareholders consent, they never will. And by the way, they don't need those laws because big business and politics doesn't mix. Remember Michael Jordan's famous statement, Republicans buy sneakers too. Big business doesn't want to alienate half of the country by getting into politics. It was a scaremongering reaction to Citizens United. It hasn't happened. Final point. The rules on campaign finance are made by the duopolists. Okay? Why would independents want to play by the rules set by the two major parties? The Democrats have their blue base. The Republicans have their red base. They know what it takes to get money from their base. They then wrote the campaign finance rules together. And there are numerous examples of why you could characterize that campaign finance law as an incumbency protection act. It creates a barrier of entry. I am attempting here in this slide to show the Charlie Whelan Fulcrum strategy. 48 Democratic senators, 48 Republicans, 4 independents as a swing vote. That's the goal, 4 or more. How are you going to get to that goal? You're going to need money. You're going to need great candidates, great ideas, visionaries, but you're also going to need money. You're going to need to pool that money and target it at the races you think you can win. You're not going to want to play by the duopolist rules if you want to break through the duopoly. So not only did Citizens United help, independents should be looking for other campaign finance restrictions to challenge. There are campaign finance restrictions on how much individuals can give, Byzantine rules that favor the party structure. Challenging those can open up more resources to this movement. Independents should be in favor of pooling resources, punching above their weight, and using corporations, using the invention of the common corporation to pool their resources to magnify their voice, to make a united voice for a more united America. Thank you.